Okay, so we have our side-scroller template up. Let me just go over my notes here because I couldn't print. Right, so we're going to make a game. I'm going to start off this game by basically making it a variant of it where instead of catching bombs, I'm catching chairs. It's like your job at the factory is to catch these chairs that are getting spit out of this machine. And if you let them fall to the ground, you lose your job and you have to start all over. You guys can relate to that, right? So we're going to do a few things. We're going to break apart our game into, basically there's like 4 main components of our game. One is going to be the character that we're going to be controlling moving around. The other is going to be the equivalent of the robber from Kaboom. We're going to have something that's moving back and forth. And we're going to have a chair, or whatever you want to have spawn. It can be anything, really. That's going to be the object that you're trying to catch. And then we're going to have the HUD, which is going to represent the score and eventually how many lives you have remaining. So we're going to do a little bit of HUD work today, too. So we're going to touch on a little bit of everything. And there's going to be a lot of different pieces. So if you feel like you're not sure on how something is being done or you want me to go over it again, please let me know, because there's going to be some new stuff here that you haven't seen, and I'm going to do my best to give you guys a chance to work with that before I move on. Right. So the first thing I want to do is I have this level, and I kind of want to set up the level because this is not really a very good level for our game. We kind of want to do a few things. One, we want to get rid of all these extra elements here that are the blocks that you're jumping up on. And I want to pull these brushes. Oh, the weird thing about these brushes is that their pivot is like all the way over here. So if you select these brushes, note that your moving widget is on the wall. I just kind of want to move them closer, like so. And then we're going to also pull the camera back. So if I play right now, this is the playable space. That seems good. I just kind of like put it in between the side scroller template words, like on basically the width of this text on the bottom here. And you can pretty this up later. This is fine for now. We just need something that is blocking collision for the player at the start. So you can see how the camera is actually following the player and is a certain distance away from the player. The properties for that camera are actually controlled. You can see, like in Unity, we would have actually placed a camera in the level. There would be something that we can move around. But for this, in Unreal, the camera properties, you can still place a camera, and you can actually place a camera that you can view from in the level. But the side-scroller template is actually using the character blueprint to control how the camera is positioned. So we've made blueprints already. We've made like light blueprints. We've made triggers and doors and elevators. The character is exactly the same idea. It just represents the player and how he's moved throughout the game. The only unique relationship between this blueprint and other blueprints is that this character blueprint, when it was made through the project template, was actually made by essentially clicking this button here, which is the same thing as clicking actor, but this guy has some properties to let you move him throughout the level. So keep that in mind. It's not really that important for now. Just be aware that this guy here, you can actually make one of these from scratch too. So if I open this character blueprint up, so I just go to the blueprints folder and double click on my character. Go to his components view, so you see this guy. And there's the camera. And I just want to pull this camera back some so that maybe about 1,000 units. Let's see how that looks. Compile. That seems good. I just want something that I can see the side walls from, so I can see where the level boundaries are. All right, everyone got the camera pulled back? Sam, Michael?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll hold off.
How far back?
I pulled it back like to 1,000 units.
1,000 units.
Yeah, it's basically, looks like minus 500 in X.
Location minus 500 in X.
Yeah. There are a bunch of other components on this character that are going to be important later. The character mover component, this is actually what controls how fast he moves and how high he can jump. We're going to be tweaking this to tweak our gameplay for the character. I wouldn't go crazy on this just yet. We haven't even made the rest of the gameplay, but just keep in mind we are going to be coming back here to control how the character moves. Just to show you guys as well, he does have a blueprint graph, which this is how movement is handled in Blueprint. There's basically an input. You guys remember from Playmaker, to move a ball, you would have like input axis, get axis vector, and then you'd feed it in to move the character. It's the same idea here. There's basically an input that's set up that handles left and right, and it plugs into the move the character here, along with jumping here. Okay. The neat thing is that this input axis is set up so that it works for controllers, touch controls, and the keyboard. And while I'm at this, I should show you guys where these things are set up. You can control which keys are bound to that input axis by going under Project Settings. And there's an input option here, which we'll get to in another class, but this is where the input bindings are set up. Okay. Everyone have that? Sam, are you good?
Yeah.
You have the camera pulled back now? So it looks like this.
Minus 500 on the X.
Yeah. Did you play and it looks correct here?
Yes.
Okay. So I think the first thing we want to do is I just want to set up something in the level, like a blueprint that's responsible for spawning chairs in our case, or whatever you want. There's a bunch of like starter content. You guys are welcome to use whatever assets you want. I just tend to favor something that is easily visible, so I'm going to spawn one of these guys in the level. And this is going to be the start of the first part of our game. We have one part which is responsible for spawning the chairs, then we have the chairs themselves. Okay. So we're going to make a new class blueprint, and it's going to be based off actor. I'm going to call this one our spawner. I'm going to prefix it with BP. Okay. And I kind of want to give it a static mesh. I want to have something that represents this thing in the level. And I kind of want to use this guy here, this preview mesh thing. I don't even know what this thing is. I think this is actually used in a bunch of their example levels. Wow. Yeah, it's like that thing here. I think it's meant, you can put a bunch of different materials on it, but it's perfect for us too because I can use this as a spawner. So with this mesh selected in the content browser, go to the spawner, and I can click on add static mesh. Just type this. Notice in parentheses it has the mesh that I have selected here. Cool. I kind of want to rotate this guy though. I want this mesh to be upside down. Now remember that you can't, I don't have any controls to be able to rotate him directly. So if I want to be able to rotate a mesh that's in the scene, I need to actually attach it to something. So I'm going to create and place a scene component in the level. This is going to be my root. I'm going to make that guy the new root by clicking and dragging him on top of the mesh. I'm also going to rename this mesh just to make it more obvious what it is. And now that you have this relationship between the root and the mesh, you can just spin this guy. I'm just going to spin him upside down because I kind of want it to be directional. And place one of these things in the level. So I have a root and a mesh. Go to your blueprints folder and drag one of these guys into your level. And I'm going to bring him up. Make sure he's visible from your camera position. He might also be a little big. Because he's a little big, I'm going to scale him down a little bit, actually. Take this guy, scale him down maybe to be a third of what he was before. This guy doesn't need to be huge, he just needs to be visible. Yeah, that's good. So something like that, where he's in the level, he basically is just a placeholder mesh. This is strictly programmer art. And this will also be used, though, to control where the chairs spawn from. You guys good? You have one of these things in a level? How you doing, Kai? Okay. Kai, you got to speak up if we're not sure too. Like, let me know if you want me to hold up. Okay. I'll wait for Ramon. Ramon, you good? Okay. All right, so we need something for this thing to spawn. So we're actually going to make another blueprint, which is going to be ultimately the object that we collect. But it's also going to be a thing that he spawns. This spawner guy will create. So we're going to make another class blueprint. And I'm going to call this one my chair. Or it could be anything you want. I don't know what prop you're going to use. The name is only really important so you can distinguish it between the spawner and the object that you're spawning. It's going to be under actor. Almost every case that you're making one of these types of prototypes is going to be actor. The only other time that you're probably going to need to make any of these is going to be when you're first making a project, which we're not going to do till like next week. So you're almost never going to be making these guys. Yeah, so the character, this guy here that's comes pre-made with the project is one of these right here. But we don't need to make one of those. We're just going to make an actor. We're going to make an actor blueprint called the chair. And again, I'm going to pick a mesh for this guy that's going to represent, obviously I want to pick the chair, that's going to represent the object we want to collect. And I'm going to select the chair in the content browser, and then again, add a static mesh for this thing. This time, this static mesh really just needs to have a few properties set. So by default, Unreal doesn't turn on physics for static meshes. It's up to you to tell Unreal that you care about physics simulation, kind of like adding a rigid body component in Unity to make something actually behave correctly with gravity and physics. You want to check this checkbox that's under the physics category called Simulate Physics. And you'll know you did it right if you click on the simulation button and it follows with gravity here. Okay. Note if I don't have that checkbox checked that nothing happens when I hit simulate. This is kind of like a preview of what the object would look like in the level after it's been spawned. There are a few other things we want this thing to do. So while we want this thing to behave with gravity, we don't really want it to react with physics. So we're going to want to change the collision properties. And I'm going to show you these collision properties in a little bit so that it doesn't, like normally a physics object will bounce around on the ground and will hit walls and hit the character and bounce off his head. But we're not going to really want that. We're going to want something different, and I'm going to show you guys how to set that up in just a second. Because by default, if I had some other physics object, let's just say I put one of these things in the level. This is a static mesh. So if I put one of these things in the level, and I bring it up to the sky, and I play, the chair falls, and hits the ground and bounces, right? We don't really want that. We're going to want this thing to collide with the player, and otherwise it's going to hit the ground and you're going to lose a life. But we don't want it really sticking around, because then it'll just bounce around and interact with other chairs. So we'll get to that in just a second once we start spawning these, and it's going to be really clear what we need to do. So now that you have this chair and the spawner, we can have the spawner create these chairs periodically. And eventually we're going to have it create the chairs and move at the same time. Okay. So let's go to the blueprint for our spawner. And let's just start off with having this thing spawn one chair every second. Okay? We'll just have it spawn a chair, wait 1 second, then spawn another chair. If we can get that working, then we can figure out how to do all the rest of the behavior correctly. So what we're going to do is we want this thing to start spawning chairs kind of immediately. I don't really care about, I just wanted to get it to work. So I'm going to hook into the event begin play. This thing fires when the level starts and this actor is present. And let's just see if we can spawn one guy. I'm just going to drag a wire off. Oh, and before I do that, before I drag the wire off, I'm going to select the thing I want to spawn in my content browser. So I'm going to go back to my level and click on my chair.
The chair or the blueprint chair?
The blueprint chair. We're done with that other chair. That other chair is dead to us. This blue chair is the new hotness. So I have this thing selected, and remember, Blueprint's trying to be context sensitive and trying to help you. If you drag a wire off and type spawn, actually, if I do, oh, weird. That's supposed to pull in my spawner. Okay. Well, selecting it didn't seem to do much, so we'll just have to do it the old way. So drag a wire off and type spawn. What you want is the spawn actor from class action. And you'll get this blue box. You can just connect them up here. This drop-down box is going to be the list of everything that you could possibly spawn. And if you search for your chair, your blueprint chair, if I search for BP_chair, that's the one I actually want to create. So let's do a few things. One, let's go to our components for our spawner. We have this mesh. I don't want this mesh to have any collision at all, so I'm going to disable collision. I'm going to select no collision on this mesh. It's important because when we try to spawn our chair, it's going to want to try to collide with this object, and we kind of don't want that to happen. Unreal won't let you spawn objects within other objects, typically. So if you go to your spawner and make sure that it has no collision set, that will help. Did you try compiling it again? Go to your blueprint. What is the error there? Let me see. Right, so this guy expects you to specify where the thing is going to spawn from. So we have our chair selected. We've disabled collision on our mesh here, which is because I compiled it turned into bad blueprint, which is not the thing we want to spawn. That's only because we haven't told it where to spawn yet. So we're going to do that next. We want to spawn where this guy is in the level, right? We're going to have this thing, which is our bad blueprint. That's going to be the position where the thing spawns from. And we can plug in something here too. So if I pull a wire off of here from the spawn transform and type get actor, you want get actor transform, which will basically take all the properties of the actor, where he is, how he's rotated, and his scale, and use those to control how this thing is spawned in the level. Now if I compile, everything should be good. Should have no errors. And save. You can play the game too, and you should see one chair spawn and fall to the ground.
Sit down, sir.
Does everyone have a single chair spawning?
Yes, sir.
What about you, Ramon? How about you, Kai? Let me help you, Kai. Did you disable collision on the spawn? That's good. Okay. And then you're spawning the rock. Okay. And then does your rock have physics enabled? So go to your rock and type simulation. See how he's not falling? That's another real So scroll down to the physics category and then on your stack mesh. Yeah, you want physics. So stop simulating. Oh, because your physics is not, you're not the root. You don't want a scene. You want actually, can you swap the mesh with the root? I want the mesh to be the root.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's completely off the thing. It's just chilling on top.
Oh, your physics can't be enabled because this rock has no physics. So I think you have to pick a different mesh. Actually, try compiling first. No rock. Try picking a different mesh.
Sit down, sir. Jeez. Just help me out.
This guy, get back to physics. Your chair's not back.
Yeah.
Simulate that. Scroll down to the, yeah, go ahead. Okay, cool. Nice. Simulate. So you fall. So try playing the level now. So you have one chair. Cool. Okay. So everyone's got chairs spun. Kelvin, you alright?
Yeah.
Dizzy? I'll give you guys a break in like an hour. Whatever. Alright. So we have one chair spawning. Or everyone should have a chair spawning. And I can even knock the chair out of the way. Cool. I don't really want that. Eventually we're just, when you touch a chair, it's going to blow up. So we're going to have that behavior in just a bit. But for now, one chair is not enough. We actually want to have a bunch of chairs spawning. Let's just spawn unlimited chairs until we get to the point where we can control the gameplay. So what we can do is we can just plug a wire in from here and add a delay on the end of it so that it spawns another chair. So if you pull a wire off the spawn actor and type delay, and I'm going to add a 1 second delay, and then pull this wire back off to spawn actor here. Compile and save. Now what you should see is a chair spawning every second. You plug the delay wire back into the spawn actor here. Yeah, so these physics objects are interacting with the camera because the camera is like losing line of sight with you, and so it's pulling the camera in closer to try to keep you in view. So this is fine. We're going to kind of have behavior for the chair to interact with you and the environment though. So as fun as this isn't quite a game yet. We need the chair to collide with the player and destroy itself. That's kind of the next thing that I think we should do. Let's set up behavior so that I can stand and collide with the chair and cause it to get destroyed. Right? So let's go to the chair. And currently it's set to be having a collision preset of physics actor, which means, hey, it's automatically going to block everything. Blocking means it collides with it and it stops the movement of the chair. What we instead want is we want this thing to have physics, but we don't want to block. We just want to overlap with actors, because overlapping is going to let us control what happens when we touch the player. So in here, in the chair, in the collision presets, pick custom instead of physics actor. And we're just going to pick overlap for everything. So you can click the top checkbox here, and it'll select overlap for all the properties.
How do you go to let's see,
The what thing?
the panel?
This panel?
Yeah.
It's just under collision. And you have to pick custom. So right now, Kai, it's physics actor. Change it to be custom, and then you'll see this list of properties here. And if you test it in game, the chair should be falling through the world now. Yeah, so it was this, right, under collision. Change it to be custom and set it to be overlap. Okay, compile and play. These things will start falling through the level now. And you notice that they're actually falling through me as well. And that's what we want. We want this thing to overlap, because we're going to detect when this chair has overlap with the player and cause the chair to get destroyed. Okay, everyone have this thing falling through the floor? You guys good? All right. So let's go to the blueprint graph for the chair. And our chair only has one component on it, just a static mesh, but it's enough that we can detect collision against this thing when we detect that someone has overlap with the chair. So if I just right-click with the static mesh selected on the left, and I right-click in here and type overlap, you can either do on add component begin overlap. Well, let's just do event actor begin overlap here. Either one will be fine. I'm using actor here just because. So this chair is actually going to have two different collision behaviors, right? One, it's going to hit the player, and it's going to count as being captured, and it's going to give the player points. The other is that it's going to overlap with the ground, and that's going to cause the player to ultimately lose a life. For now, we'll just have it restart the level to restart the game again. It has two different behaviors that we want to exhibit, which means that we need this thing to actually distinguish between the player and the ground. And the easiest way to distinguish between the player and the ground is to take what we hit and see if it's the player or the ground. So anytime this thing overlaps, we get this blue wire, which represents the thing that we overlapped with. Now, in our case, this is going to be probably one of three things. One, it's either going to be the player, or we're going to add something to the ground, which is going to let us know it hit the ground, or it could be the couch, the chair spawner. So let's just figure out if it's the player first, and then if it's a player, let's set it up so that it actually causes the chair to get destroyed. How do we detect whether this thing is a player or not? Well, this other actor is going to be any type of actor, which means it's going to be anything that it found that it overlapped with. If I go back to my map, this chair that I spawn is going to overlap with the player. If I put a trigger box in here, it's going to overlap with those. It could overlap with this guy here as well. And in order to distinguish between them, we can take this guy, we can ask, hey, are you a player? Or hey, are you a trigger? Are you a spawner? What are you? So I pull this wire off, and I type cast. Casting is basically saying, hey, are you this thing? try to be this thing. And if you are, tell me, and then I can use you for my own purposes. Yeah.
This is a little bit confusing. It says other actor and everything, but you said like for this side scroller
Mhm.
template, the character is made from a character instead of an actor.
Yes. Oh, that's good question. Because ultimately, let me show you what that means. Everything in Unreal is ultimately, everything that is playable and spawnable is ultimately an actor. So here is how Unreal is set up. There basically is one, you guys don't really, haven't had any experience with it. So, okay. In Unreal, every single object is placed, every single thing, every sound, particle system, material, mesh, the sky, the player, everything is considered to be an object. It's basically the base most type of thing that Unreal has. It's like kind of like, like humans are derived from like, humans are bipeds, they ultimately are mammals, right? And mammals were ultimately like organisms, and everything has like this family tree, this hierarchy of relationships, like dolphins are mammals as well. Mammals are like the base for humans and dolphins and lions, and everything kind of shares under that one parent, the hierarchy, right? Yeah, so this is going to be the equivalent. So this is like the parent most object for all of Unreal. Right under that, there is actor, which is kind of like the second largest parent. Like kind of like how, I don't know what the largest like genus of like organisms are on Earth. Is either like probably bugs is probably one of them. Then there's like mammals, right? So actor is like probably the most common thing in Unreal. Actors are things like that have the ability to render. They are physically placed objects in the level. Anything that's physically placed in a level or could be in the level is considered an actor. And under here, you're going to get things like pawn, which ultimately is also a character. So here's the relationship, right? Well, it's good for the other guys, too. They should know that the character here, which is this guy, is actually right here. So character comes from, my character, this blueprint right here, comes from here, which comes from a pawn, which actually comes from an actor, which comes from an object. Okay. So we can tell when the chair collides with something, it gives us an actor, but we can try to see if it's something else instead. Right? Which is why we can cast it to be something else. Yeah, that's for sure. It's everywhere. This is important though too, because this is actually how it's done in C++ as far as like figuring out whether something is or is not a character. So we can cast it to my character. Because my character is actually the blueprint, remember, that we have in our content browser. This is the blue guy that's running around. We can see if it is one of these things. So if you cast it as my character, you're going to get a few options. One, this is going to be, hey, yes, the thing I overlapped with is a character. Or no, the thing I overlap with is not a character at all. So you have two different possible outcomes. It's only ever going to be one or the other. You can't be both. It's either going to be a character or it's not. Okay? Make sense? All right, so if it is the character, what we can just do is destroy the actor, which is ourself. That's all it is we see, hey, this chair started overlapping with something. See if it's a character. If it is, destroy it. Go back to the map. If I stand underneath the chair, notice that the chairs are actually destroying before they fall through the ground. The first step to our game is detecting that you've overlapped with the chair. If it's falling through you, make sure you're using the right overlapping. Oh, it's behind. Make sure it looks like this. You should be able to tell that it's overlapping with the player.
And so far, where I'll be lost, I can get there.
Okay. Yeah, run the redistributed too. Did they put their distributed all as well?
I have no idea.
Let me need to run. restart now if we miss the chair. And kind of like, we're going to kind of do it how Unity does it, where if you die, we'll just restart the whole level, and then that'll cause everything to get reset. Ultimately, we're going to add lives and respawning. Holy crap. That was a lot of chairs. Yeah, I want it so that if the chair hits the ground, we're going to restart the level, right? How can we add some things that lets us know that the chair actually hit the ground or not? Well, the easiest thing for me is actually to just add a trigger on the bottom here that is used to determine whether this guy, when he overlaps with it, is hitting the chair or hitting the trigger or the character. So if I search here for a trigger in the level up here in the top left, I can take a box trigger, I can pull him into the level here. So I just dragged the box trigger in there, and I'm going to kind of scale it up to match. And kind of put it in the middle in between the two, that way you can just scale it up in one dimension. Okay, scale it up like this, position it like this. So my trigger box is like right there. It can kind of be underneath the ground as well. It doesn't have to be right on top. You kind of want it to be lined up with the ground, like so. We're eventually going to have trigger boxes on the sides of these walls as well that control the spawner when it moves left and right. Everyone have a trigger box in the level? Did you hit G by chance? If you hit G, it'll turns it into game mode, which will hide everything. Okay. Kai, you good? You have a trigger? But you, Ramon, Sam? You guys good? This trigger is actually going to cause overlapping events too, so we can add overlapping events against this guy in the level. This does mean that we can't like just copy and paste our game somewhere else, because this is dependent upon this trigger, but it's not really that big of a deal. Okay, you guys good? Let me know when you guys are good.
We're always good. We're always good.
Kai, you good? Yeah. Right? Okay. You can change the text. I like these like 3D text things.
Gotta check them all. Pokemon?
Yeah.
Click on your spawner.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Sam, you good?
Yes.
Now? How about you, Ramon?
Yes.
You got a trigger? Okay. If once you have a trigger, what you can do now is you can pull a wire off of this. I'm in the chair blueprint now, so go to the chair blueprint where we're testing to see if it's a character. And if it's not a character, what we can do is just figure out if it's a trigger instead. So what I'm going to do is pull a wire off of the actor from the overlap event. So pull a wire from this leftmost guy and do another cast. And this time, we're going to cast it to be a trigger box. So something to keep in mind, this will fire any time it collides with any trigger box. This is not really a problem right now, but we're going to do things a little differently later when we want to distinguish between one trigger box and another. But for this case, it's fine. So cast it as a trigger box, pull a wire from the failed cast into here. And now, if you have detected that you've collided with the trigger box, that means you've hit the ground, which means we can fail the player and reopen the level. So I pull a wire off of here, off the trigger box cast, and I'm going to type open level. And I'm going to type in the name of my level, which is example_map. Okay. Otherwise, it won't do anything. So if it collides with a character, destroys itself. If it collides with a trigger, it reopens the level, which will essentially restart your game.
So you could use the same thing to change level?
Yep, you can use the same action to change levels. So I'm going to catch these things, and as soon as it touches the ground, the level restarts. And then it restarts all over again. Touch the ground, and I let one go, level restarts. So that should be what the behavior looks like. Please make sure it works.
Yes.
All right. Making progress. So now we actually have a loss condition for our game. Whether it's kind of cheesy, I mean, it restarts the level, which is not quite the same as a game, but it's something. We can now at least detect whether the player has properly hit the chairs or not, right? We have something that can collect chairs. So how do we actually make this into a game? Because it's just something very simple. Well, if we want to make it into a game, all we have to do is really move the thing back and forth, and then we can start tweaking parameters like how fast it spawns the chairs or how fast it moves, or we can add components like lives. This by itself is technically not really a game. I mean, it's like, can I stand under this thing and then I can let go of my keyboard? But as soon as it starts moving, it actually turns into a real prototype. All right. Almost there. Let's do a few fun things. First of all, I don't really like, if you look up here, see how the chairs are actually spawning above the spawner? Let's spend a little bit of time making that thing behave correctly, which will ultimately let us do some more fun things with the chairs. I kind of want the chairs to be spinning, and I want them to spawn with a random rotation because I want them to seem like it's more than just the same chair every time. They're basically going to be tumbling out. So let's do that, and then we'll add the rotating behavior. Actually, let's do the movement behavior first before I jump into making it spin. So something that Unity does really well that Unreal hasn't quite gotten a handle of yet is basically telling one object to move to a specific location. So what we're going to do is we need to be the ones to create the behavior that lets us move the spawner back and forth. And this is actually a really good example of how games actually handle moving objects from one position to another. We are going to set up something that moves our spawner a little bit at a time to simulate the look as if it's moving back and forth. And what that means is I kind of want this thing to slide back and forth like this, right? I want to move as if it's on a rail. So what's actually happening if I move it from here to here over 1 second, right? It's actually moving a little bit at a time, right? Like I'm moving it like this, but the faster I do it, those eventually become where you can't really tell the discrete individual little movements. Like it's actually moving like this, right? This is actually what's happening as I'm clicking and dragging it. It's moving a little bit at a time. Like I'm actually moving this Y component. Like if I move it here.
Can't you just look it at a timeline and then give it a random Y?
You can. We can't really give it just a random Y because I want this thing to collide with the wall. It's going to have actually speed, which means it hits the wall, bounces, but sometimes it'll be random here. And it's going to try to keep going in a single direction as much as it can until it hits a wall. So normally, I would just make it move completely random, but I don't actually want that. And this is actually a good example of something that we can reuse over and over again later. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of something that is more full feature than that. So look here, look at the Y value here as I move this thing. And I'm going to turn off my, my snap. So as I move this thing, look at my Y value over here. Notice that every time I move it, it moves just a little bit. But if I do this, it's kind of moving a lot, but it's still moving by discrete little tiny bits at a time. We're basically going to be doing that behavior. We're going to be moving it a little bit at a time to make it seem like it's moving back and forth really fast. And ultimately do this kind of behavior where you're basically acting as a printer. Right? That's kind of what we want. And we can get the same behavior. Unfortunately, I can't like edit this, but like if I type 51 here, 52, notice it's moving ever so slightly to the left, right? Moving really slowly, but it's moving. Right? So we're going to simulate that movement behavior. Okay. So I'm going to drag a box around all this up here, because this is responsible for our spawning. I'm going to drag a box around. I'm going to hit C, which is going to let me add a comment. I'm just going to give a comment to this thing, spawning, because we're going to add a new set of behavior that is separate from this, and I don't want the wires to kind of overlap with one another. Okay, so in order for us to move it a little bit at a time, we're going to hook into a new event, which is called tick. And this event gets called every single frame as fast as the game can possibly call it. So the faster your game is running, the more times this thing will get called. In addition, the time in between ticks is going to be passed to you in this green float, which is delta seconds. This is how much time has passed between the last frame and this frame. And we can use this little guy to move our spawner back and forth.
So a tick is just a frame.
Yeah, and just to show you guys what it actually means, don't do this. I'm just going to show you. I'm going to log out what the tick is actually doing.
Look at this master code.
You like that? So good. So look on the left. Those are what the delta times that are getting sent through are. That's how much time, that's how many seconds have passed between the last tick and the current tick, right? And you notice that it's actually not quite, it's not exactly the same. Oh shoot, it doesn't show.
So
It's not exactly the same every time.
So in Unity, it'd be time by delta time then.
Right, exactly the same thing as time at delta time. But see how here sometimes they're faster and sometimes they're slower? Right? It's variable. It's not the same every time. And like if I'm doing shit in the background, see how the delta time goes up? That's how much, that's actually 1/3 of a second has passed between the last tick and the current tick. So, going to our spawner here, I'm going to delete all this. Now you guys understand that this thing is happening all the time. What we can do is every time it gets called, move our little spawner guy just a little bit. And eventually, because of how often this thing gets called, it's going to look like smooth movement. So let's just drag a wire from here. We're going to set the actor location of this actor. And what we're going to do is we're just going to nudge this guy. We're basically going to take his current position. We're going to take the current position of this guy, and we're going to nudge him just a little bit every time. Just nudge him a little bit like this. So we're going to set his position equal to what he currently is at, plus just a little bit. Okay. So this location here, first off, I'm going to drag a wire backwards and do get after location. What is this going to do every tick? Ultimately nothing. We're setting the location of our spawner equal to where he currently is. Does that make sense right now? Like, he's not moving anywhere. I'm setting the new location to be the same as where he currently is. I need to take this. I'm going to actually put stuff in between here, so make a little bit of room in between these two things. Yeah, we're going to add. So we want to add a little nudge onto where he currently is here. Okay? So drag a wire off of here and type the plus sign. And we're going to add his location plus another location, which we're going to make based on delta time. So he has two wires coming off of him. I want you to take the wire from this add and replace that one here. So it should look like that. So we could do it the wrong way. I'm going to show you how to do it the wrong way. Yeah. Just to show you guys how it's working. Like with just this, I can type in a value here in 1. Like I can just type 1 here. And this is going to move him every... I'm going to actually do something way less than 1. I'm going to show you. I'll show you all that stuff in just a second too. No, it's okay. It's his choice, man. I don't judge based on that. Yeah, so I'm just going to add 0.1 units every tick to his location. See how he's moving up there? But watch. If I have something else up here, let me just show you guys a little bit. Let me increase the movement that he has. It's just, I just bring up something in the background. So watch how fast he's moving now. As soon as I pop this open, he's actually moving slower, which is not really what I want. And the chairs are spawning weird, which is another issue we'll look at. So we want this behavior, but he's actually spawning chairs. I want this thing to be based on how fast my game is running, because what is 0.5 to me? How fast is he actually moving? He's not moving 0.5 units per second. He's moving 0.5 units per tick. Yeah. What we want to do is instead move him. Let's say I want to move him. How fast do we want this thing to move? Let's gauge how the distance of. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. So what is the distance between this and this, right? This is between about 1,300 units. If we want him to, say, move, let's say this much, let's say like this much in like a second. We want him to move 400 units a second, right? He can move a quarter of the screen in 1 second. So I want to be able to figure out how to move him 400 units per second, because I want this thing to be based on gameplay. I want him to be able to move from like here to there. That's the speed. That's the speed I want. I know I wanted to move about that much, right? About 400 units per second. I want to move this much. So like 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. That's how fast I want him to move. Just because I want to be able to, I kind of have an idea in my head of how this thing should move. And it's hard to figure out what that is here. I want to just type in like 400 here. That's not going to work here. If I type in 400 here, he's going to fly off the side of the screen. He's already off the end of the world. Like, even like typing 2 here is going to make him move really fast. Oh. Maybe I'll type in. Yeah, it's not really the speed that I want. And there's a downside to this. I mean, it may look like he's moving the correct speed, but on a faster computer, he'll actually move faster. And on a slower computer, he's actually moving slower than what he should. Like if I ran this game on my laptop at home, he'd move like 4 times as fast because he's not respecting this guy here. We need to use this delta seconds in order to properly move him relative to how fast your computers are running this game. Okay. So what we're going to do is first, I want a couple of things. I'm going to add a couple of new variables that control both what direction he's moving in and how fast he's moving, because I want both of those things to be saved because we're going to actually speed him up and change his direction periodically. So let's just pull a wire off of here first. Make sure I got my notes here. Pull a wire off of here, and we're going to make a vector. And what make a vector lets you do is lets you break apart x, y, and z. And notice now they take floats. Each of these guys is a green wire. And I want to control this guy here. I want him to be controlled based on this delta seconds. So if I just pull a wire off of here from delta seconds, and I type the multiply, I want float times float. Or I type asterisk, whatever. And I'm going to plug this into y, because he's moving along y in the level. This is the y axis that he's moving. So it should look something like that. Do you guys have this yet? Not yet? Pull a wire off a delta seconds. Or you have to pull a wire from there first. Yeah. You want to make it that. This. See how this thing's going. Okay. And then pull a wire from here and type the multiply. Asterisk, you gotta type this. Float times float. Float times float. I like to pull him all the way to the left. So look at coming like that. Let's see that thing. You guys good? Plug it into the wire.
The only thing I have is having a plus bond to
Oh wait, go back to that. Okay, did you set this in the overlap wall? On the boots? Oh, you have to set the trigger box in the wall.
Oh.
So I just add a trigger box to the bottom of the floor. Oh, cool. Just going on. Yeah, okay, we're almost there. So what this is doing now is it's taking the delta seconds, which I showed you earlier, and we can multiply something here. This number right here is what we can put in as how many units per second we want this spawner to move. Right? So if we type in 400 there, he's going to move 400 units per second regardless of how fast or slow my computer is. So what I can do is I can just type 400 here. And play. And now he's moving at the speed I expected. Okay.
Oh my god.
Everyone have something moving like that? You just type in a number here.
Oh, you just left me.
No, don't leave me. It's like I'm taking my chairs elsewhere. You guys got it, Ramon, Sam, Kai? We're going to then add in behavior to have him hit the sides in reverse directions. You have nothing plugged into the setup.
Oh, shit. Set application.
Obviously, it's restarting a level every time that you miss a chair.
Yeah.
Wait, is it restarting every time it touches you too? Touch the film. Okay, so it looks like your chair is actually restarting the level even if you touch it. Go to your chair. Okay, so zoom in on that guy. Start after self, that looks good. Oh, your trigger box. How high up is your trigger box? It looks like your trigger box might be a little too tall. It's probably touching your trigger before it touches the player. Yeah, see, your player is not as tall as that guy. So just put him down, put that thing on the ground. So bury that thing in the ground. That's weird. Yeah, put that thing all the way in the ground. So you can barely see it. That's good. I'll try it. That's better. Okay. Everyone's big pie, you good? Okay. So let's have this thing be able to change directions when it hits the wall. Okay, that's the next thing. Then we'll do one more thing and I'll give you guys a little bit of a break. So I want it so that when this thing spawns and it's moving and it hits that wall, it's going to change directions and go to the right. So how can I do that? Well, right now he's always moving in this direction here. What I actually want to do is have him move left and right, depending on both whether he hits the walls or not, but also sometimes randomly I want him to change direction. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to add more trigger boxes on the sides of the walls here. Okay. So follow along with me here. We're going to add more box triggers into the walls here. I'm actually going to have this thing go inside. And I'm going to kind of go in a top-down view here. Let's see the side view.
Did you duplicate a trigger box with it like that?
No, you can duplicate them. And I'm also going to scale this guy up. So he should be kind of, he doesn't really need to be as tall as the world. He just needs to be in line with the spawner. So this is from a side view. My trigger box is like that, and there's my spawner. So that's kind of like the relationship. I'm just going to duplicate. Remember, you can alt drag to duplicate and move at the same time. Oh my god. Which will let you constrain movement to a single axis. If I hide these walls for a second. That's what my trigger boxes look like. Oh, if you want to, you can click on the little eyeball next to these things and it'll show or hide that actor, which will make it a lot easier for you to like move the trigger box inside. This is a super common thing to be able to hide and unhide things. I think there's also an option to, only the selected, you can hide everything, or you can unhide everything. Like that. I think there's a hotkey for this too. Yeah, H. So that's what my trigger boxes look like. You guys good on trigger boxes? Both sides? Okay. All right, so once you have your trigger boxes, we have to add something on the spawner that lets us detect collision with those triggers. So go to your spawner and go to your components. We're going to add a box to the spawner. And we're going to rename this thing trigger.
Chairs spawn and restart with the sides.
Mm-hmm.
Should we make the chair smaller or should
We're going to do something to address that too. So before I get too far, adding this trigger to our spawner is going to cause some bad behavior because our chairs are actually spawning right on top of the spawner. And our chairs will restart the level anytime it detects that is overlapping with an actor. By adding this trigger, now our chairs are going to overlap the actor as soon as they spawn, which is going to cause your level to basically infinitely restart the level. So we're going to have to change this a little bit so that our chairs don't spawn right on top of this actor. Okay. So I'm actually going to widen. Let's fatten up this collision a little bit here. I want this thing to be a little bit wider than the spawner itself, so that it can detect collision with the walls. Something like that seems good to me. So we can solve the problem of this thing causing collision with the chairs. So if I play, this may break everything. We're going to actually spawn the chairs slightly below this trigger. So let's go to the blueprint. You guys all have a trigger added to your spawner? Yeah. Okay. And you have triggers in the level, right? These guys. Okay. Then go to your spawner and go to your blueprint. Currently, he's spawning right on top of the actor. Instead, what we want to do is we want to nudge these chairs down a little bit so they're spawning slightly below the actor, maybe like 100 units or so underneath him. Okay. So in your spawner section here, take your actor transform, and I want you to pull a wire off of him and pick the break transform option. We're going to split apart the rotation, the location, and the scale. So we have this transform. We've broken it apart, so now we can pull out the location, rotation, and scale. So we're going to modify this guy a little bit. Just like how we took this location and we modified it a little bit, we combined the two down here. We're going to do the same thing here. So once you've broken the transform, pull a wire off the location and type plus. Yep. And I just want to put it down maybe 100 units in Z. And then the last thing you need to do, I'm going to drag these guys off a little bit more to the left, and I'm going to maybe increase the size of this thing. Oh, here's a trick. If you want to be able to update your comment box to include, notice here as I'm moving my comment box, it's only really moving some of them. If you've pulled guys into there and you wanted to include them in your comment box, you actually have to click on your comment box. Click on your comment box and do refresh nodes, which will now combine everything inside. So here's the final step. If you want to be able to plug in this thing, you can either convert it to a transform like this. You can just pull a wire in like that. I don't want to do that, so because we're going to actually change the rotation of these things too. Let's do it the right way. Take this guy here, this vector add that you've added, pull a wire here, and type make transform, and plug that into here. Why did I do this? Well, I want to also change the rotation. I want to actually spin these guys around. So, everyone have this so far? How about you, Ron? No, allergies. I don't know. Is there some kind of dust or something? What'd you say, Kai? You guys good?
Yes.
Okay. So right now it has no rotation. Pull a wire off of this guy, the rotation, and type random, and just pick the random rotator here. This will automatically give our chairs a random rotation when they spawn. So let's just compile. Let's just test what we have right now. Notice how now the chairs are spawning with a random rotation. We're going to make them spin too in just a little bit.
I'm so happy you picked chairs.
Yeah. Okay, so back to what we were trying to do, right? We have the trigger set up in the map here. And we have our spawner, which has a trigger box. And what we want to do is we want to say, hey, when the spawner hits a trigger, reverse the direction of where it's currently going. So I'm going to pick the trigger on the left. Oh, wait, before I do that, I'm just going to drag this box around our movement behavior. I'm going to hit C, and I'll comment this thing and say movement. If you guys ever work at on a team that uses Unreal and uses Blueprint, get in the habit of grouping your objects up and commenting them. It really helps. Like this already is really easy to see with the difference between the two, and it's going to make it a lot easier for you to understand what's going on. Here's another tip too. If you want, sometimes you'd only want to comment one single node. Let's say I want to say like, hey, I want to comment this guy here. You can actually right click on any node, and right here where it says node comment, you can be like, hey, spawn a rotated random chair. And that'll give a little tiny quote bubble above the object in your blueprint, which will give a little bit of a hint to anyone looking at it. Okay, so there's our spawning. Here's our movement. Let's go down and put some more behavior right below movement. So click on the trigger on the left and type overlap. And we're going to say when this spawner overlaps with the walls, we're going to have this change direction. Okay. Here's a question. What controls the direction of our movement right now?
The Y, that right there.
This right here, right?
Okay.
Yeah, this is moving 400 units in Y, right? So here's our spawner, right? 400 units in Y, it's moving positive in Y. So if we want to move that way, all we have to do is actually just reverse that, right? So instead of taking this value here, which is 400, and hard coding it like this, we actually need to take it and multiply it by some value. So go up to the movement section and take this value, which is currently 400, and I want you to just right click and promote it to a variable. And this variable name is going to just be speed. And if you did promote to variable, it automatically takes whatever value was typed in before and makes that the new default. So if you compile your blueprint, you should see this speed variable show up with 400. And then finally, what I want to do is I want to add something that controls the direction of what we're moving in. So click on add a new variable again. This is going to be an integer. Let's do a float. I'm going to rename this guy direction. Compile the blueprint and scroll down. Make sure this is not 0. I'm going to make this thing 1 by default. Making it 1 means, hey, I want this thing to move positively. And all we have to do to make this thing respect the direction is pull a wire off of here, and type multiply, and we're going to multiply a float by a float. And we're going to just drag this direction variable that we created on top of the multiplication input link here. You should see a little make b equals the direction. It'll automatically connect your variable to the link here. And then connect this guy up to y instead.
So we're practically just going to be modifying direction variable to tell it whether, like,
Ye-
whatever collision.
Yeah, and randomly, which is what I'm going to have you guys do, is 10% chance of when a chair spawns, flip the direction of the speed. And it actually works pretty well. Like, it makes it really close to the behavior of Kaboom, where it's like, it sometimes will, it's like a printer head, totally, and you can control that behavior. How you can actually change how often it changes direction, which makes it harder too. Hi, how you doing? Okay. One more little bit, and I'll give you guys a break, and then we'll come back. You guys good?
Yes.
Okay. Once you have this set up now, you can have the trigger, when you overlap, all it's going to do is swap the direction that we're moving. So pull a wire off of here. Actually, what we're going to do is, so here's again, you have to kind of change. I was going to pull a wire off here and say, hey, swap the direction, but instead I kind of have to go backwards. So over here on the left, click your direction, and I want you to just hold down Alt while you're dragging it into the blueprint. This is going to let us change what the direction is. And what we're going to do is also hold down Control while we drag that same variable in here. So we're going to set the direction equal to the opposite of where it's currently going. We're going to flip. We're going to multiply by -1. So take this direction, pull a wire off of here. We're going to multiply again, float times a float. And I'm just going to type -1 here. I'm going to connect the wire from here up to here, and the wire from here up to here. So what's actually happening is that when you touch the trigger, just multiply direction by -1 and set it back right away. Okay, so compile and save. I want to comment around this guy too. Notice here he's actually changing directions. It looks like every time a chair spawns. Well, it looks like he's colliding with the chairs themselves. I didn't lower, if you're having this kind of weird behavior where it's changing directions every time, you probably need to lower the spawn of the chairs again. Let me just go here, go to my spawner. I don't think I lowered this guy enough. Let me lower him 200 units and see if that makes any better. That's better. Not quite. He's still kind of colliding. I'm going to move him 300 units down. And yeah, you just want to make sure your spawner is not colliding with the chairs. Oh, and another annoying thing for now, I'm just going to disconnect the level restart behavior. Disconnecting this thing will let us make it so that we'll at least be able to test that he's working correctly. So I did two things. I lowered the chairs from where they start a lot more, and that means I may need to raise up the this guy. Make sure your spawner is also lined up with the player spawn. Sometimes which means your chairs won't be able to get picked up. I'm actually going to shrink this trigger box a little bit. I'm gonna go here. I'm going to raise this trigger box a little bit. Okay, so I raised up my trigger box on the spawner. I'm just trying to make the chairs not collide with the spawner itself. I'm also going to make this thing like -150. Maybe raise this thing up here. I just want this guy, just tweak this value to be whatever you need to have in your own spawner to make sure that your chairs aren't colliding with the spawner itself. You should see it only change directions when it hits the side walls, like that. Okay. And then I'm going to let you guys hook up the behavior where it has a 10% chance to change directions after it's on the chair. How are you guys doing?
Awesome.
How's it going? Okay. Show me that. Is it working?
It is, but it's not moving well.
Oh, it's because your direction is probably 0. Like this guy here, I bet you just put it onto the bottom. See how you 0? You set that to 1. Just type in. Oh, and I disconnected that level restarting thing because I actually wanted to, for now, I want to be able to test it. See how he's changing directions though sometimes? It's because your chairs are spawning on top of your trigger. So let's go to your spawner. Let's just raise up the trigger box in your spawner. So go to his components. Click on the box here, and I would just raise it up. Just move that guy up so that the chairs are basically spawning right on top of him. See that? Move them up so your chairs aren't intersecting that. Yeah, try that. See if that works any better. Yeah, you guys probably the same problem. I see he's still changing directions. That looks good. Try disconnect the chair restarting level behavior, or try to catch all the chairs. Either one. It's kind of annoying that the level restarts every single time. So Calvin, try to set it up so that the thing changes directions randomly.
Do we need to use an array?
No,
Oh,
you don't need to use it.
trying to think about the chairs. Changes size.
You need to pattern the spawner drop box so it's wide. To make it extra wide. So now that's wide enough.
Ah, get that out of here, Unreal.
Is this working well? Does it change directions on the side, right? You can raise it up on.
No works. It matters. Trying to figure out how to get this randomly.
You are not good at that. Are your triggers set up on the side of this? Is your spawner set to spawn triggers? Oh. Oh.
Don't worry about that.
What was that that I just saw? That's another thing. That you probably don't need.
Probably need to get that wide.
Yeah.
Give me a hint.
Yes. Every time it spawns, you need to do a branch.
Oh.
And when you do that branch, you're going to compare it against a random float.
Wait, what are we doing now?
The next thing I want you guys to try to do is set it up. You have it set up now that it changes directions when it hits the box, the size of the walls. 10% chance to reverse direction. So Kai, show me him. Taking my job. Because you have to guess he's firing chairs.
Yep.
That's good. Oh, see how it changed direction though without hitting the wall? That's because one of your chairs collided with your spawner. So let's raise up your spawner trigger box a little bit. So go to your components of your spawner. And yeah, just raise that guy up to like here instead. So I'll let you guys work on that. Take a break at like 10 o'clock. Come back in like half an hour or not. And I'll give you guys a hint. If you want to hook it up so that it randomly changes directions 10% of the time, you have to catch it when it spawns a chair. And after it spawns a chair, I want you to use the branch function. Critical thinking here. You already have the behavior that lets you reverse direction, right? You just need to take that behavior that reverses the direction and do it 10% of the time after it spawns a chair.
I didn't know I was on it. I saw that like a mile away. Good morning. Oh my god. Awesome. Ah.
Your timing.
Oh no. Me too.
Like the worst game of Kaboom cannot see.
I think I can get to the other side and just push it back down the line.
Okay. Not quite what I asked for.
I'm experimenting.
You guys need a little bit of another hint? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, so what you kind of want to use, we have this thing that spawns an actor, right? So right now there's a delay between, and it just goes right back in. Instead, you can pull a wire off of here. You're going to use a branch. Do branches make sense to you guys? Like, it's basically...
It's true, it goes one way, it's also goes the other.
Yeah, you have two possible outcomes. If it's true, yeah, it does this. If it's false, it goes the other link. This is what it branches on. This is basically has to be true or false. If this is true, fire off this link, right? If this is false, fire off this link. So what you can do is, if you want something to have a 10% chance, what you can do is use the random float. You're going to use this guy. Random float gives you a number between 0 and 1, right? A random number between 0 and 1. Okay, so what you can do is you can compare a random float, which is between 0 and 1, against something like, let's say, 0.1. If you do that, 0.1 will be less than the value that you pick a certain percentage of the time, right? So
Cool. Where do you put that in though?
Wait, I
Unless
think
we
we
did
go.
variables.
Don't tell me yet.
you're going to use random float and branch, and then one other thing. How do you tell? Give me a random number between 0 and 1. 0.7, okay? Or 0.2, 0.3, 0.999. How do you use the random float and the branch together to see if it's greater than 10% of the time?
Just out of curiosity, when it does that random, does it exclude the top whole number?
For random float, I don't think it excludes that. I think it actually can include 0 and 1.
Oh, because a lot of times, I don't know, from my experience, I guess, like, it always includes, like, the low number, like, let's say 0, but it never includes the high number. So, like, high number, like 50, it doesn't include that 50.
So here's the thing, like everyone actually does random number generation differently. They actually should be explained whether it includes the bottom number and the top, inclusive of the min and max, or exclusive.
I was just curious.
Yeah, it's different every time. Yeah. More hints. It's kind of like isn't there a game show that like makes it easier? Oh, Wheel of Fortune, right? Where there's like the beginning round, the Wheel of Fortune, where they have like a blank slate. They only reveal like 2 letters, and then they start revealing more letters, right?
Is there a way that we could have it randomly pick one, like have the spawner go to a randomly pick, and then it'll say true or false, just a random, so randomly?
There's no like random bool or anything like that, because I want it to be a percentage of the time. How do you do percentage? How do you do crit chance in games? Like you guys played League of Legends. Ramon, what are you playing with? What are you playing with it?
Me?
Yeah, games. Ramon.
Probably WoW.
Wow.
No, I'm just app games, baby.
What's that?
Just app games.
App games? Oh, that doesn't really count, I guess.
Yeah, no, but I'll play a little bit to leave that to my phone.
Okay. So like any game that has like crit WoW included, right? There's a percent chance that you can get a crit, right? Let's just say the chance that I can get a crit chance. Whoa, I cannot. That was really backwards. Crit chance is equal to 25%. Okay? So 25% of the time, not every 20, not 1 out of 4 times I'll get a crit, but like about that chance, right? I'll get a crit. I can represent that as a number. So if I have this like bar that represents from 0 to 100% about how likely it is I get a crit, right? This is about 25% of the time. That's how often I'll get a crit, right? Like on this graph, this is 0%, this is 100%. If this graph represents my total amount of hits, let's just say it represents all the damage I can possibly do, 1/4 of this graph represents my crits. I'll get a little bit of that as a crit, right? That makes sense. From 0 to 100. I can also represent this from 0 to 1. This value here is 25%. If I take that same graph and just change the units, what does this value become here? What is this number here?
0.01.
Point what?
0.01, you just leave that 10%.
This is 25% on this line right here. On this line. What is this number here? From 0 to 1.
0.25.
Point what?
25.
0.25? So 0.25 represents 25%. If I get a number between 0 and 1, and I want my crit chance to be 25%, how can I tell if I got a crit or not? If I just start spitting out numbers, which of these numbers dictates whether I got a crit or not? Tell me.
This is a 0.25.
Yeah, Ramon, tell me which of these numbers. Is this a crit? If I'm looking at this graph up here, 0.01.
No.
Why not?
0.
0.01 is here. Where is it on this line?
Okay. Yeah.
What about 0.7? Is that a crit?
Can be.
0.7 here?
No.
What about 0.35?
No.
No? 0.6? What about 0.1?
Yes.
How did you determine that these were crits or not? If this number fell in between here and here, right? Between here and here. If the number is in between here and here, 0 and 0.25, it's considered a crit, right? What about randomly changing directions? What if this thing is from 0 to 1, like I just did, right? But instead of 0.25, I have 0.1 here. Which of these numbers would cause it to change directions? That one. But let me just erase this. Right? Same experiment. 0.1 now. This line here. This is 0.1. Which of these numbers means it's a crit? If I have a 10% chance to crit. This one is a crit?
Yeah.
Is this one a crit? 0.7? I have a 10% chance to crit now. No? No, 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 no. What if I have a 85% chance to crit. Which one of these is a crit? This one, right? This one? This one? This one? No. This one, right? And how did you know that? You compared these numbers against 0.85. And if this number was higher, it's not a crit. Right? So you can use that same idea here. I'm telling you guys, instead of a 10% chance to crit, it's a 10% chance to change directions. Random floats are giving you a number between 0 and 1.
Yeah, what's it called to determine when it's in that sense?
What did Ramon just do to tell whether these things were crits or not?
What he was is what I'm trying to, what's the name of it?
Yeah, what did he do? You
I
learned
know he
this
did.
thing
He
in
just
second
checked-
grade.
he
You
checked-
learned this,
he checked
you know alligators? You know how one thing is greater
I
than
just don't know what
another?
it's called. I'm trying to find it.
So how do you represent whether something is greater than a number or less than a number? Back in grade school, remember like the alligator signs? The greater than or less than symbols? Remember these things?
Can I get you to check my shit after you're done?
That's what you use.
Oh, I didn't even know we were freaking out.
It's just a comparison, you're just seeing if a number is less than. Get rid of the restart level behavior.
Mother of God.
Is this cool?
Let's see here. Yes. Exactly.
Okay. I think I took in too much sugar. I'm like blanking out a little bit, so you know.
It's okay, but that's right.
It's like I'm getting like a little fuzzy, like trying to get the neighbor's porn channel.
Neighbor's porn channel, like I think I make out a boob.
On your.
That looks like a boob. It's actually some guy.
Your antenna is made out of a bunch of old wires and hangers
That's a 90%
and aluminum
chance
foil.
to swap directions.
Oh shit.
Oh no, yeah, you can do it that way too. It's basically like, what do you want the true behavior to be? How often is this going to be true? You tell me. You have it right. It's fine. Just explain to me in words. How often is this statement will be true? How often will this link fire?
It should fire 10% of the time.
It will be true 10% of the time.
Or it'll be false.
Which one is it?
Hey.
Just reason it out. Just
I have no
pick a
idea.
random number. Pick those random numbers up there. You can't even read those.
But it's 0.7.
Yeah. How often is this thing going to be? How often is a random number going to be greater than 0.1? Does it seem like it's
90%.
yeah,
Oh,
90% of the time it's fine because 90% of the time is fine. 90% of the time the way you have it set up, it's not going to change direction.
I was there
like halfway through that lecture.
Right. And I was doing it while blanking out.
We got it, Kelvin?
Yeah.
Okay, take a break for a bit. You guys take a break.
I'm gonna load up with more sugar.
No.
And more donuts.
Wait,
You really?
Yeah.
Alright, so now spawn them out.
I was not spawning.
I don't know.
Oh, because you probably disconnected your spawning. Because you have to spawn once in here. See, there's two possible outcomes. That's
You're
right.
gone.
That's totally right. Okay.
I thought
So
about
what this
that.
means is that this thing.
That's actually a good idea.
Can you zoom in for a second? Yeah. So you're gonna pick a random number between 0 and 1, just like I did up there, right? How often is that random number going to be less than 0.1? So don't look at anything else. How often is this going to be less than 0.1? Like, would you say there's two possible answers? It's either 10% of the time or 90% of the time. Which one is it now? 10% of the time is going to be less than 0.1. Yeah, correct. So 10% of the time is going to be less than 0.1, which means that's when you want to change direction. So when this thing is less than 0.1, you want to change directions, right? So if this thing is less than 0.1, then it's going to fire this link here. You're going to want to change directions off true. Otherwise, you're not going to want to change directions. So I would suggest copying and pasting what you did down here, down below where you hit the wall, that behavior. See here? This right here, you want to just take these three things, you just want to copy them, and put them up here. You can plug true into there, which is going to let you change directions. Change it, plug true into there. Okay, so now there's two more things you have to do. After you've done this test, it's either going to be, hey, I need to change direction, or hey, I don't need to change direction, just keep doing this link. Either way, this link and that one over there that you can't see, you're supposed to go anyway. Both of these things need to go back into the spawn ring. You have to loop it back so it keeps on spawning things. So these need to get connected back to here. So plug faults into there. The left side of that. And the other guy, all these come all the way over here. So drag that guy all the way around there. Yep. Now it should say about 10% of the time it should change directions. Get rid of the level respawning behavior on your chairs. So wait, stop right for a second. Go to your chair real quick. And I just want you to disconnect the link that restarts your just disconnect that link.
Oh,
Yeah. Just control click. The Y, the link. Or alt compile and play again.
so it can be floating like that?
Yeah, it can be floating. What we just did is right now it was restarting the level every time you missed a chair. I just don't want you to have to deal with the level restarting constantly.
Right.
Just disconnect that temporarily for now so you can play it. So see how it changed directions right there?
Yes.
You don't even have to move, like it'll change directions on its own for some of the time. So see how it changed direction right there? That's working correctly. Take a break. Please come back by like 10:30. Yeah, we got more stuff to do.
Oh, for the whole loop and raise?
Yes, it was just I just wanted you guys to use a different mesh. Just replace what you should have two versions of the same thing.
I wasn't sure, so because I texted Sam yesterday and I was like, oh, what was it? You know, like, what did he keep wanting from home? Where he said loops and raise, so I just looked up some YouTube stuff.
Yeah, the YouTube videos are exactly what we kind of did. So if you did that, if you did anything like the YouTube videos did, then that's fine. That's exactly what we did in class.
Because one of them was like, I guess once you hit the F key, this stuff keeps on flipping. I'm not
Yes,
sure it's
yeah.
loops.
That's good. Yeah, those are loops and arrays at the same time.
Okay, cool.
Do you have that here today?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, show it to me after break. And then I'll collect it at the end of class.
Okay, cool.